Don Ritchie, you brought a book with you called Vietnam Hearings. What is this book?
This book was printed in 1966, so it's now 50 years old, and it was a book I used when I was teaching a course on American history in the 1960s. I was at the University of Maryland, and we used this book because it was excerpts from the hearings that Senator Fulbright had convened on the Vietnam War in early 1966, and it was both the proponents, the supporters of the war, people like Dean Rusk and General Maxwell Taylor, and the opponents of the war, people like George Kennan and General Gavin. And so we could teach this by showing the students both sides of the arguments. And also, of course, they were being interrogated by senators who were on both sides of the argument. So you really got to look at what the issues were and get some idea of what the defense was and what the opposition was to the war in Vietnam. It was one of the first really usable books that came out that wasn't enormously partisan one way or the other way about the war. And that was why those hearings were so important, was because they did present both sides of the issues. By about January of 1966, there were perhaps 125,000 American troops in Vietnam. Not as many as there would be by 1968, but far more than there had been a year earlier. When we had a year earlier, there were perhaps about 30,000 troops. And General Taylor had been very much involved in American Vietnam policy from the beginning. President Kennedy had sent Taylor to Vietnam in 1961 to look at the situation. And Taylor had said it was a dire situation, that he didn't believe the South Vietnamese government could defend itself, that Americans would have to get involved. He saw Americans sending more naval support and more air support. General Taylor did not, however, as an Army general, did not believe that U.S. combat troops should ever be sent to Vietnam. He was totally opposed to that. General Taylor became ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Vietnam in 1964. The previous ambassador, Henry Cabot Lodge, had left to come home to run for president, and so General Taylor was sent. And while he was there, he sent regular telegrams to the Defense Department, the State Department, the President, saying it would be a big mistake to send ground troops. When President Johnson decided to do that, it in a sense went against the recommendation that General Taylor had. But General Taylor was a loyal soldier, and he supports, in his testimony, he supports what the Johnson administration is doing. He gives some rationales for it. He talks a lot about what the North Vietnamese were doing, what the Viet Cong were doing, about the atrocities that were going on. He talks about it more as a moral situation. He's not giving a realist perspective on the war. But we now know, because his telegrams are now public record, and even his telephone conversations with the president are public record, we know that he had great reservations about sending ground troops, that he believed that the United States should draw the line and only send naval support and air support.